Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our latest webinar. Today, we're going to be looking at ESD wrist straps. Um, my name is Vaughan Callan. I'm the European Sales Manager for Desco Europe. I'm an ESD certified technician, and for my sins, I've been in the ESD control business for 35 years. And at this point, I'll hand you over to my co-presenter to introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Stephen Burns, Desco Europe brand manager. I've been with Desco Europe for 12 and a bit years now. And today I'll be helping out with answering questions. We'd love you to submit your questions, any questions on anything that we cover, any questions that you've brought with you perhaps, depending on which version of GoToWebinar you're using, it will look like one of the images on the screen. So just follow those instructions and put your questions in there. You can do that at any time through the webinar, and we'll have a pause for questions at the end to cover as many as we can. We won't cover all of them, but we will get to every single person that asks a question by email following. Just to start us off, we do have a very quick question that we'd like to ask. It will be coming up on the screen, and the question is, what type of wrist strap are you using at the moment? Single wire, dual wire, or other? So if you could just take a second to answer that question on the screen. We won't leave this open for very long, a simple question, and then we'll get back to the webinar. So maybe 10 more seconds, please submit your answers there. That's fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. Vaughan, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Back to you later. So what we're going to be looking at is the wrist strap. Yep, we all know what a wrist strap is. It is one of the most basic ESD control products, but arguably one of the most important, because it is the most reliable method of grounding a person. Now, again, we all know a wrist strap set consists of two parts, the conductive wristband and the grounding cord. But it is one of the most important parts of ESD control, and there's whole sections dedicated to it in the European standard. And let's just take a second just to look at a few of these. Now, I know there's a lot of information on the screen, and there'll be more information as we go through the webinar, just to let you know that we will be sharing the PowerPoint that we're using today with you following today's webinar. So a wrist strap needs to maintain less than 100 volts on the human body. That's what the standard requires. Really, with today's technology and the increasing susceptibility of devices, then we're really looking for much lower than that, but the standard calls for maintaining less than 100 volts. There are some requirements set out in the standard for wrist straps sets, and you can see here we have product qualification and compliance verification. Product qualification is really when you're specifying, when you're going to buy the wrist strap set, is to what you need to be looking for, making sure that what you buy, what you're going to put into use, meets these requirements in the European standard. So the wrist strap set must have a resistance of less than 5 × 10⁶. And when looking at the actual wristband, the interior of the wristband must have a resistance of less than 1 × 10⁵ ohms, and an exterior resistance of greater than 1 × 7 ohms. So that's for product qualification. Now, in compliance verification, this is when the wrist strap is in use and you need to test it. It needs to have a resistance to ground of less than 3.5 × 10⁷ ohms, which is less than 35 megohms. And typically, well, what the standard calls out rather is that you should do a daily test on your wrist strap, and we'll come to that later. But there is also another means of testing your wrist strap, and that is with continuous monitoring. So if you're using products of such value and sensitivity, that continuous monitoring is required to make sure that that wrist strap is working, the whole time, and then you can verify that. Then you should consider continuous monitoring, or it could even be required depending on the susceptibility of the components that you're handling. Again, in the European standard, all employees stroke operators must wear a wrist strap when seated. So if it's a seated operation, then the required means for grounding that person is via a wrist strap that is grounded to equipment or AC ground, and that's the preferred method of grounding. And as a minimum, a daily compliance verification needs to be done. So you need to test your wrist strap at least once a day, and a log of those tests must be kept and maintained. So when looking at the wrist strap set, let's look at the personal safety, the safety aspect for people using those. Now, inside the grounding cord, you will need to have a 1 meg ohm safety resistor. And what that will do is offer protection up to 250 volts. So if you are using equipment ground or your AC ground, if any power surge did come back down the line, then that 1 meg ohm resistor would take out any voltage, so therefore giving operator safety. But that is only up to 250 volts. If over 250 volts, for example, if you're using energized equipment or in high pot testing, so anything over 250 volts, then a wrist strap or personnel grounding products should not be used. And we can talk to you about other ways of ensuring that your area is ESD safe, other than using personnel grounded equipment. So we can deal with that. So if you have that as a requirement, please contact us and we can look at alternatives for you. Another safety aspect of a wrist strap and coil cord is that the wrist strap and coil cord must be able to disconnect from each other with a breakaway force of 1 to 5 pounds. Again, it's another safety aspect. And a number of our wrist straps are UL listed for their design and being classified as safe to use. So let's look at, we'll start with the grounding cords first of all. And the most common type of grounding cord is the single wire, as you can see in the diagrams in the top part of this slide. And the termination end, which is what we're talking about, is the end that plugs into ground, is the most common are either a 4mm banana or a 10mm snap connection. The standard banana plug is, as you can see in the diagram at the top, and generally a wrist strap set, the wristband part of that is usually either of a cloth or metal band. There is a couple of alternatives that we'll come to, and the not so common wrist strap type and coil cord type is the dual wire, which uses 2 wires, which we will talk a little bit more about later. And the termination of these is, instead of a 10mm snap or the standard banana plug, it uses a 3.5mm mono plug. And dual wire wrist straps are the required, or one of the required wrist straps for a number of the continuous monitors. Now, another type of wrist strap that you can get, I just mentioned that the most common are cloth or metal wristbands. Well, there is another type, and this is one of ours, which is a disposable wrist strap. This is ideal for one-time use or for visitors, or what a lot of companies use this for is to ship along with ESD sensitive components, or as we see here, such as memory upgrades or sound cards. So when the person receives their memory upgrade, for example, they can ground the wrist strap to the chassis of the the equipment, and therefore put themselves at the same potential, so therefore they can do the transfer of the memory upgrade or whatever it might be in absolute safety. Now, most of Desco Europe's wrist straps sets, and I'll refer to it as wrist. When I'm talking about wrist straps, I'll be referring to the wrist strap set, which is the band and the cord. Most of our wrist straps are manufactured in the UK and USA. At our production facilities, in our own facilities, and we've been manufacturing these since 1980, so very early on in the history of our company. And what we use is a medical grade stainless steel because for anti-allergenic purposes. And all our wrist straps are lock coded for traceability, and all the products are stocked here at our facility in the UK for distribution throughout Europe. We look at some of the wristband makeups, and the first one and the most common one is the elasticated fabric wristband. Generally these are all one size, so they're adjustable, but you can get some fixed sizes. We use a wide knitted band, which is gives us better longevity in our wristbands. They don't stretch out as much as the cheaper wristbands, and it woven into the inside fabric. We have a silver coated nylon thread. Again, this is using anti-allergenic materials for to cut down on the allergic reactions. And again, wristbands will generally come with a couple of different common terminations on them, which would be the 10mm snap stud or the machined 4mm snap studs. When I say machined, I'll talk a little bit more about those later on. And we now have our MagSnap connection, which we will come to. And it's important to know that on our fabric wristbands, most of them come with without a metal backplate. We have a covering on those because more people are allergic to the back plate than even to the thread woven into it, because the back plate tends to have a high nickel content, which way more people are have an allergic reaction to that. Now, if they do have that reaction, there is another alternative, which is our thermoplastic wristbands, again with a 4mm or 10mm termination. These have no metallic contact making any contact with the skin, so these can be an ideal way of helping those people who suffer from allergic reaction. And these are very comfortable to wear. It says here that they're lightweight and they're low profile. I personally find them very comfortable to wear, but they are an ideal alternative to the standard fabric wristbands or even the metal wristbands. Talking of which, we look at our metal wristbands, and again, these come in adjustable and fixed size. If you see the line drawing at the top, you'll see how the adjustment works on our adjustable wristbands, in so much as that the wristband section actually inserts into the buckle area, so you can adjust the size up and down. So we don't have any extension links that need to be either put in or taken out like most other adjustable metal wristbands. And we also use a technology in our metal wristbands that are pinchless, so they're not going to snag the hairs on your arms. And the other important feature of our wristbands is the insulated cap. So if you see the diagrams over on the right hand side, the black outer surface, that is not a painted surface. We use a two-part construction. We've got the metal inside, and then on the outside we have the insulated caps that clip onto it. With the painted adjustable metal wristbands, you can get the paint flaking off, which can result in foreign object debris. Odd is the terminology for that. And these again will come in a 4mm termination or 10mm termination, and our new MagSnap connection. and this is our MagSnap connection. It's a patented design of ours. It really is, it's very new. It has no moving parts to break, unlike, you know, the 10mm terminations and the 4mm terminations, which have moving parts. The MagSnap doesn't, so the longevity of the wristband is, and coil cord, is increased, and because there's no moving parts, there is far less likelihood of intermittent faults. The other component part of a wrist strap set is the coil cord, of which we have two types, the PVC and the polyurethane. And if you look at the pictures here, the black cords are PVC style, and these are relaxed retraction. So when extended and in use, they contract back down to size in a relaxed fashion, so therefore causing less drag on the operator's wrist. And the other type we have is the polyurethane, which will retract back to size much quicker. And what we also have on a number of our coil cords is a lifetime strain relief warranty. And just looking at that, this is the diagram in the middle of this slide is actually showing us flex testing our coil cords. And what you actually do, you have to cycle through flexing the strain relief on these. The standard calls for a minimum of 16,000 flex cycles before they're accepted. Whereas ours, we have tested ours through millions of flex cycles. Therefore, that's how we can give a lifetime warranty on the strain relief. As well as the standard 4mm banana plug, we also have the angle banana plug, which a lot of people oh, excuse me, a lot of people like to use because it does increase the life, because you're not putting as much strain on the strain relief on the termination end. So when using a straight banana or a 10mm termination to ground, people tend to just yank on the cord, and that increases the stress on the strain relief. Whereas the banana plug for insertion and disconnection from your ground has to be in you have to grab each side of the banana plug housing, you know, pretty much where I'm going to move my arrow here. You have to grab each side of that and pull it out in a straight fashion, so there's no excess strain on the strain relief or the banana plug. Now, just to talk a little bit about the 4mm banana plug termination, we use machined steel for both our straight and angle banana plugs. You know, cheaply made banana plugs tend to break and bend, whereas we use machined steel, and you can see ours here has this curved edge, which increases the diameter of it to give extra strength. And then the spring part that goes over the top just here, we have 8 springs in ours to give a much better insertion into and holding into the grounding point where it's terminated. The other thing on the coil cord, the ground cord on our wrist strap sets, is that they come in multiple lengths from 1 meter up to 2 meter. And it's important to note that when qualifying a wrist strap set, that if you need a 2 meter grounding cord, then it must stretch to 2 meters and beyond. Many suppliers make claims of, well, this is a 2 meter length cord, and it doesn't actually extend to that. And if it does, it doesn't retract back down to a manageable size. So it's very important that when specifying wrist strap sets, that you actually get what you're paying for. So make sure that if when you need a specific length, that the cord will actually do the job that you want it to do. Moving through to the testing methods, there's 2 test methods that are acceptable in the European standard. That's periodic or continuous testing. And the periodic testing recommends a minimum of 1 test per day, and a record of those tests must be kept and maintained. Now, For us, there is a downside to only testing once a day. So if I give you an example that someone starts work at 8 o'clock and they work through their 8-hour shift and go home, and then they test the next day because they only have to test once a day, and they get a fail. Well, that fail could have happened at any time from when they tested the previous day until the next test. So what they could have done then is, they could have worked a large part of their previous shift with a faulty wrist strap set, which is therefore put product that they've handled at risk from ESD damage. So we would advocate testing more frequently than once a day. It's okay to just keep a log of the test once a day, but we would always advocate just to make sure that that wrist strap is working and continues to work, that you test it each and every time you leave and then re-enter the EPA, the electrostatic protected area. Or if using highly sensitive components and you've chosen to use continuous monitoring, what this offers is full-time verification. So that is not periodic testing at all. It's making sure that the wrist strap is working and the wrist strap set is working all the time. And if you're using continuous monitoring, then you don't have to keep any paper logs of the testing. And just to introduce to you, if you see the bottom picture on the right hand side, we have just introduced contactless touch testing, which is a periodic test. But in these days of the virus, which we're all very well aware of, we've come up with the contactless tester, so we don't have numerous people touching a test button on a tester. They can simply walk up to the contactless tester, insert their hand. The picture is showing someone inserting an HID card, but you can just insert your hand into that tester to break an infrared light beam to activate the test. But to do that, you would need to be using dual wire wrist straps to do that. And we're very happy to talk to anybody if they have any questions or want further information on our contactless touch testing. Talking of the testing, one of the key areas that we see is we get a lot of people when they test their wrist strap is they get a fail high on the tester. This is usually caused by dry skin and people putting their wrist strap on, and before they've worked up any sort of moisture on their skin, they're getting a fail high. And if they do get that, then what we recommend is if you use a moisturizing hand lotion, that enhances the effectiveness of the wrist strap, which is particularly good for individuals with dry skin. But you need to use an ESD safe hand lotion. And because it's an ESD safe hand lotion, it will not insulate the skin like regular lotions, because it doesn't contain any lanolins or silicones, which insulative in nature and therefore can contaminate the electronic components. So at this stage, I'll hand you back to Stephen Burns, who will let us know what questions we've received and answer those questions for you. Over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Vaughan. So thank you everybody for your questions. As I mentioned before, we won't have time to go through all of them. We'll get through as many as we can. We'd like to finish in the next 5 minutes or so. Before we do that, I'd just like to put up another poll on the screen, which you can be answering while we're going through some of these questions. Hopefully you see that. Which improvement in wrist strap validation would you be most interested in? So we're assuming that most people are currently using a periodic tester with a paper logging system. So the improvement over that would be either touch testing with data acquisition, a continuous monitoring solution, which then doesn't require you to keep a log, or even continuous monitoring with data acquisition. So if you could take a look at that, answer that question while we go through some of the questions that you've submitted, and thanks again for those. So somebody has asked for further information on skin reactions to wrist straps, what solutions are available. And the first thing to say is really any of our wristbands should be suitable for people even with skin irritation issues. The issue is typically caused by a nickel content, and Vaughan mentions that all of our wrist straps, the stainless steel elements, use a medical grade stainless steel which has a very low nickel content and is only for the most extremely allergic people will you see a reaction. But for those customers, those operators, our fabric wristbands have a plastic cover over the back plates where the snap is connected, so there is absolutely minimal metal contact on the skin. And we also have our thermoplastic wristband option, which Vaughan also showed. So we'll get in touch with the person that asked that question and just sort of list those options. And we'd invite you to request a sample as well, so you can try it out and see how your most allergic operators react. If anybody else is in that same situation, please get in touch with us as well. We'd be happy to talk you through those options.
How many people?
Another question is why are, so we said right at the start that wrist straps are a more reliable grounding method than footwear. Somebody has asked why that is, and really it comes down to the permanency of the connection to ground. So wrist straps, you plug in to your bonding point and you are therefore permanently connected. It's a continuous connection all the time. The wristband is attached to your wrist and the cord is connected to the bench. You compare that with footwear, where you can be lifting your feet, particularly if you're sitting down, you'll be lifting your feet and the connection is impermanent. So that's why our statement is that wrist straps are the more reliable grounding method, because it's a permanent connection to ground. And then there's a sort of a follow-up question which is kind of connected to that. Can you use wrist straps and footwear? Will the wrist strap performance be affected? And actually lots of customers do exactly that. They'll wear wristbands at the bench and also have footwear to allow them to remain grounded when they need to leave the workbench to go over to a stores area or something like that. The whole room is considered the ESD protected area. The benefit of that is that you can handle static sensitive parts away from the workbench because you're still grounded through your footwear. It doesn't affect the wristband performance at all. In a compliant ESD protected area, everything would be at equipotential at the same voltage. So there's no danger, there's no impairment in performance to have your ESD shoes or ESD foot grounders on the ESD floor whilst also being grounded via your wrist strap. One last question I think we'll cover today. As I say, if we haven't covered your question during the webinar, we will get back to you by email, and thank you for all those questions. But there's someone's asking, why is dual wire better, or in fact, is dual wire better than single wire as a wrist strap? And the answer is yes. Three key things we'd like to flag up there. One is that dual wire gives you a redundancy in path to ground. If one of the conductors breaks, you're still grounded via the other conductor. So it will fail a test or it will fail on the continuous monitor, but the device that you're handling is still protected. You won't have that split second period where you're disconnected, where you could potentially cause damage. Another real benefit is the opportunity to use close to 0 volt monitoring options. All monitors put a voltage on the operator. With a dual wire wristband, you can use a very low voltage monitoring option. And finally, Vaughan mentioned this, but we've recently developed a touchless testing option that will work with footwear and with dual wire wrist straps. It won't work with single wire wrist straps. So another real benefit in these times is the ability to use contactless testing options if you're using dual wire wrist straps. I think that's all of the questions that we'll get through today. Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you for attending. Thank you for your responses to our polls as well. That's great. And we'll be following up to invite you to our future webinars. Vaughan, anything more to say on that?
No, I just want to thank everybody. I know because I can see, what a great attendance we had today, and the sheer volume of questions that we've received today, and just to thank you for all those questions, and that we will be responding to each and every one of those questions that we received, even the ones, obviously the ones that we haven't addressed during the webinar. If you have any questions that come to mind following today's webinar, you can see my contact details are there. Please call me, email me with any further questions or any ESD related issues that you need addressing. You'll see here there's a couple of resources that we've referred to today, and the first one is we referred to the European standard. If you want to obtain a copy of the European standard, there is a link embedded into the PowerPoint you'll receive that will take you to the IEC website, so you can buy the relevant standard. And also I'd ask you to use the Desco Europe website. All our products have a technical bulletin to assist you in making your product choices. There's a whole host of ESD information on there. And finally, just thank you very much for your time. It's much appreciated. I hope you found it helpful. We will have another webinar next week, which will be on ESD flooring and grounding, and you will receive an invitation for that very shortly. So once again, thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to welcoming you to our next webinar. Thanks, everybody.